Good morning, church. How are you this morning? Sound a little lethargic after Thanksgiving, right? It's been a while since I've said this, so I want to say it today. I love this church. I really do, and I can't think of a better place to worship God. And I can't think of a better partnership that we have in ministry to do service on behalf of our Lord and Savior Jesus Christ. And so, over the Thanksgiving holiday, hopefully you had time to reflect on what you are thankful for. And one of the things that really came to my mind is I'm thankful for you. I'm thankful for this church and what the Lord is doing here. And so I love you guys. I love you guys. We continue our message series this morning from the book of Genesis. We'll be in chapter 20, and it's on the life of Abraham. And so just keep that in mind, that Abraham was sojourning. In other words, he was journeying in life. He was passing through this world. This was not his final destination. In fact, he was called a stranger in the world, and so are we, the Lord's people. We live in this world, but this is not our final home or destination, and we're just passing through. The Apostle Paul tells us that our citizenship is in heaven, and we're basically ambassadors for Christ here on this earth. And so heaven is our home, our final destination, and so it's important for us to keep that in mind. And so as we live on this earth, and that's all that we've experienced thus far, it's not always easy. To live in a way that God has called us to live, it's not always easy. We want to do, but whether we do is another thing. We want to be pleasing to God, but we sometimes struggle. So living in this world in a way that is pleasing to God, to be people of faith and trust in Him is not always an easy thing. And thank goodness that we have the grace of God. And so this morning I want to talk to you about God's grace, and specifically, understand that grace is God's unmerited favor and blessing on your life. And so I want to talk about God's amazing grace this morning from chapter 20 of the book of Genesis. And it may seem strange as we first read this that I'm talking about grace from this passage of Scripture and this story in the life of Abraham. But I assure you that as we kind of get down into the meat of it, if you will see that this is a wonderful portrait of God's demonstrated grace in the life of not only Abraham and Sarah, but also to a pagan king. And so keep that in mind as we read through. And so we're going to jump right in with point one. And point one is God's grace and repeat offenders. Imagine you find yourself in a difficult situation. You're a believer and you want to live a life that's pleasing to God. And then next thing you know, you find yourself doing things that you don't want to do. In fact, you've done them before, and you promised yourself. You might have even swore that you would never do that again, but then you find yourself doing the same old thing or saying the same old thing. And this is not what you want, but this is where you find yourself. You find yourself, in other words, a repeat offender. The very things you say that you won't do, you end up doing. And so we're going to look at that this morning, and we see in chapter 20, and I want to read verses 1 and 2 for our first point here. Now Abraham moved on from there into the region of the Negev and lived between Kadesh and Shur. For a while he stayed in Gerar, and there Abraham said of his wife Sarah, "She is my sister." Then Abimelech, king of Gerar, sent for Sarah and took her. Now, these verses elicit all kinds of questions, because we know that Sarah is Abraham's wife and has been for many decades. And so the questions are right there, notably the why questions. There are a lot of why questions. And I think sometimes in life, that's really what we all want. We want to know why. Why did somebody murder that person? Why, if you watch one of those crime investigation type shows or listen to a podcast, you really want to know, okay, they did it, and we found out that they did it, but why did they do that? And sometimes you never get the answer to the question of why. And so why would Abimelech take Sarah to be his wife? Why would he do such a thing? Think about it for a moment. She's 90 years old at this point. And so maybe she's aged well, and I think maybe she had great skincare products, and she just looked young for her age, and he was attracted to her because elsewhere it does say that she was beautiful, and beautiful at 90 is a possibility. And so, why did he want her to be his wife? That's a good possibility. Maybe she was a beautiful 90-year-old. We don't know how old he is, but he's obviously old enough to have children, as we'll find out here. And she hasn't had any kids yet, so if that's the goal, this isn't looking pretty good for Abimelech. And so maybe it had to do with, I need to be in a good relationship with this powerful nomad named Abraham. That's another possibility, because back in the day, just like in the Middle Ages, you intermarried. This has been going on ever since there have been different kingdoms and nations, that we intermarry with these people. We give them our daughter in marriage, and they give us one of their daughters, and so that we're less likely to go to war with each other because it's family. And you can kind of see this, and so maybe but we don't know why, but it's an interesting question. But the more important question of why does Abraham say that she's his sister? Especially now, because, he's done this before. Remember message 2, I mentioned that in chapter 12 of the book of Genesis, Abraham lied about his wife being his sister because he went down to Egypt during a time of a famine to get some food, and when he did so, he was afraid that Pharaoh would take his wife away from him, that he would take Sarah to be, and that knowing that it was his wife, he would then kill Abraham. In other words, he would kill Abraham so that he could get his wife. And so he was fearful of that. And so they lied. They said, well, yeah, we're brother and sister. And then, so he does take Sarah to be his wife. But then God prevents him from going any further by striking him with a disease. Somehow Pharaoh comes to understand, hey, this must be Abraham's wife. We don't know how. Maybe God showed up in a dream there. But either way, we know that that's what happens. And he summons Abraham, and he goes, and this time his name is Abram. He summons Abram, and he says, listen here, why did you do this to me? Good question. Well, now we find, and eventually sends him away with a bunch of wealth and so forth. So this has happened before. Maybe it's happened more than once before, as we can muse about and speculate about a little bit later in this passage. But we know it's at least happened once before, some 20 or 30 years ago. So why is it happening now? He's no longer Abram, and she's no longer Sarai. It's now Abraham and Sarah. And 20 or 30 years later, they've been walking with the Lord 20 or 30 years more, seeing how good and gracious God is. All they've known is God's goodness and God's faithfulness to them. And so you would think by now they would not fall into the same offense, right? Repeat offenders. And so I want you to see here for a moment that there is grace for repeat offenders. Take it to heart that I know that some of you, in fact, all of us, some of us are very more aware of our repeat offenses. The familiar sin that we keep doing, the bad habits we slip into. They lure us away, and you got to understand that God shows grace to Abraham and to Sarah, even though he knows that they're repeat offenders. He shows them grace in this story. Have you ever found yourself in the shoes of a repeat offender? If so, this message is for you. And perhaps if you're honest with yourself, there are no good excuses for repeat offense. There aren't any. We'll come up with them, but there are really no good excuses for why we repeatedly do the things that we shouldn't do, and we promise God we won't do them. There isn't. But there's hope for you and me in Genesis chapter 20, because we see that God still shows grace to repeat offenders, namely Abraham in the texts, and you and I as we live our lives.
And so let's continue on and with our next point. God's grace secures future promises. But God came, this is verse 3 of chapter 20. But God came to Abimelech in a dream one night and said to him, "You are as good as dead because of the woman you have taken. She is a married woman." Now Abimelech had not gone near her, so he said, "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation? Did he not say to me, she is my sister? And didn't she also say, he is my brother? I have done this with a clear conscience and clean hands." Then God said to him in the dream, "Yes, I know that you did this with a clear conscience, and so I have kept you from sinning, and so I've kept you from sinning against me. That is why I did not let you touch her. Now return the man's wife, for he is a prophet, and he will pray for you, and you will live. But if you do not return her, you may be sure that you and all who belong to you will die." Now, one thing we can say about God is when he shows up, he really shows up, doesn't he? I mean, think about this for a moment. He doesn't beat around the bush. He shows up in Abimelech's dream. And he gets right to the point in the dream. No soft, a discussion here. He comes right out and he says it. It's not in most modern translations, but the first thing out of God's mouth is the word, "you behold." It's one word in the Hebrew. In other words, you behold, you listen to me. Take notice. You take notice. You listen. God is warning Abimelech here, and he wants him to listen up about what he's going to say. I don't know about you, but if I were to have this dream, it would be a nightmare. I mean, first of all, God showing up in a dream, it can be a good thing, but this would be a nightmare. How would you feel if God showed up in your dreams and he began saying to you, "Hey, you listen, you're a dead person. You're as good as dead. Hey, listen to me now. I think he's got your attention." You may have noticed that Abimelech automatically goes into defense mode. I love this, Dreams are interesting, but he goes into defense mode and he argues, for himself here. First, by saying in verse 4, he questions God's fairness in his judgment. "Lord, will you destroy an innocent nation?" And then second, in verse 5, he points out that Abraham and Sarah had lied to him. It's true, right? Did he not say to me, "She's my sister"? And didn't she say that he's my brother? And then third, in verse 5, he says that he's innocent. "I have done this with a clear conscience and with clear hands," in part, in which God agrees with him. But not for what Abimelech is thinking. Not because Abimelech, by his own power, didn't do this, but God lets him know, yeah, you are innocent because I kept you from sinning. Think about that. We always think about God keeping us, right? God's keeping me from having fun. God's keeping me from doing this. God's keeping me from, he's preventing me. He's always putting roadblocks in my way and so forth. Let me rest assured this. God may keep you from some stuff, right? But most importantly, it's important for you to realize that God keeps you. A lot of times he can keep people from sinning. Even a pagan king, he prevents him from touching Sarah. In other words, he keeps him from committing adultery. And even if, now let's think about this, even if he had committed adultery and he slept with Sarah, it's still adultery unbeknownst to him. Are we checking here? I didn't know all this. Well, you're still not innocent of adultery. Now, you and I are a little more gracious because, in this regard, we pull our punches because we're sinners too. And we have this kind of sense of well, that's just not fair. He didn't know. Okay? But God's the one that keeps him from sinning. See, it's God, and now we're starting to see a glimpse of God's grace towards this pagan king by keeping him from doing a sin that was unbeknownst to him. Does this make sense? So this is grace of God. And I think God shows up that way, keeps you from things, from doing things that you don't even know that you would do. And sometimes we might even realize, we feel like we're being constrained, but we're being protected. Does this make any sense? Well, God shows up in a decisive way here. Okay? He's highly involved in the moment to prevent things. He even shows up in Abimelech's dream. Okay? I think we'd all agree God shows up in a very decisive way and he gets involved. Have you ever noticed that one moment God is nowhere to be found, and then the next moment he shows up in a decisive way? Have you ever felt that way in your life? Now, when you read the Bible, let's be honest, some amazing stories happen in the Bible, right? And we read about God showing up in decisive ways in the lives of his people. And then you think about your life. And you go, well, is God ever going to show up? And so think about that for a moment. Does it ever, do you ever feel like you're shortchanged because God didn't show up in a decisive way? I mean, come on now. We all know that God's always there. He doesn't have to show up. He's just there all the time. And so there's no need for God to show up. God's already there. But what we mean here by God showing up is that he shows up in a decisive way, and gets heavily involved. And that's what we long for, and that's what we pray. But it seems like we get shortchanged on that. You must realize that God showing up in mighty ways, he doesn't always do that. And in fact, even in the Bible, you realize that when you read the Bible, you're going across thousands and thousands of years. And over those thousands and thousands of years, even though it looks like he's showing, everything's been truncated, everything's been condensed. And you have to understand that even in the Old Testament, where God seems to show up a lot in very decisive ways, you got to understand that it's not just years, decades, but a lot of times centuries between God showing up in a decisive way. And during that time, whether Old Testament believers or what, all they had during that intermediate time when he's not showing up in a decisive way is his word. And they faithfully tried to adhere to his word. Does this sound a little more familiar? That all we have is his word. And I hate to say it that way, but it's I'm just trying to be honest. We might think that why isn't God showing up in a decisive way? But the time interval. Then all of a sudden he shows up in a very decisive way. He's there in the moment. He's involved. And then here's the question then. It's another why question. Why does God show up in decisive ways at sometimes and other times not? Have you ever wondered that? Why does he do that? Now, I don't have all the answers to this, but I think that our scripture provides an answer for you. And we find that answer. Remember, the second point is God's grace secures future promises. Okay? So let's consider what's been promised, or what is being promised, if you will. God had been promising Abraham and Sarah a son. And not only a son, but through that son, his offspring would become a great nation. And through that great nation, all the world would be blessed through a particular descendant. We find out in the Bible that particular descendant is Jesus Christ. Okay? That's the promise. And so you have to understand that at this point, they've seen very little of that promise coming to fruition. Let's be fair. In fact, they haven't seen anything. See, in fact, they die seeing very little. They never saw the promised ancestor Jesus. They never saw the great nation. They never saw all the world being blessed through him. You go, okay. And at this point, we know that when we read the Old Testament, we find out that they die having seen very little. In fact, Abraham, all he sees is a son, Isaac, and his grandsons, Jacob and Esau. That's all he sees. And Sarah even less, because when she dies having only seen her son Isaac and not her grandsons. Great nation? No. All the world be blessed? This descendant? No. None of that. They see they die seeing very little. And at this point in time, they've seen nothing. They haven't even seen the sun yet. So keep that in mind. But that's what's being promised. And so there's something fundamentally troubling about this. That this offense that they keep repeating is that they lie about their relationship with each other. You would think by now, especially after chapter 12 and maybe some other occurrences in between, that Abraham would trust God a little bit more and that Sarah would join him in that trust because they know that it wasn't just through anyone, but they would have a son through Sarah. Abraham would have a son through Sarah. But what does Abraham do? He goes back into the familiar sin of not trusting God, and he lies. They both lie about their relationship, putting his relationship, Abraham and Sarah's relationship, in jeopardy. And so the promised future is in jeopardy. Because it's through their son together that a great nation would have a descendant that would bless the whole world. And so we kind of see our answer, don't we? So why does God show up in decisive ways? Well, because the promised future depends on it. The promised eternal future of not just one, but many depends on it. See, parents know this and understand this very well. Imagine a little boy named James, and if there's a James in the house, especially a young James, hey, forgive me, this is not you. This is just, imagine a boy named James. And James likes to play out in the street, but his parents, like all good parents, they tell him, James, don't go out in the street. It's dangerous. You can get killed. You can get hit by a car. And so they would sit out on the porch, and James would be playing in the yard. But James would look out into the street, and James would go, that looks pretty fun. All the big boys are in the street. Big boys get to play in the street. I'm a big boy. I want to be a big boy. And it looks fun, and that's where all the action is. So James would kind of like stray into the street, And his parents from the porch would yell out, James, get out of the street. And then James would like kind of go back into the yard and so forth. And even when James gets a little older, James strays out in the street. And they say, James, from the porch, get back in the yard. And James would. And so now one day, the parents are sitting on the porch and they see a car around the corner, down the street, runs the stop sign. And it's a sports car, and it begins to accelerate with that loud muffler and everything, And what do you think they're going to do? Because this car's now coming fast. Do you think they would reason to themselves, you know what? We've told this boy over and over again not to play out in the street. He needs to learn his lesson. Or will they, as before, sit on their chair in the porch and say, James, get out of the street? Or do you think the parent would get up, run as fast as they could, yelling, get out of the street, and attempt to swoop their child out of the street? You know the answer to that. Parents don't always rescue their children, and God doesn't always rescue us. But they do rescue whenever their future is at stake. Think about that for a moment. It's one thing if he's just going to fall and maybe get a bloody nose or something like that. But when his future is at stake. See, we have that same sort of situation here. When not just Abraham and Sarah's eternal future is at stake, but so are everyone else's, God decisively acts. So we know that God decisively acts to secure a promised future. Point 3, God's grace can be failed. Verse 8 and following, this is verses 8 through 13. Early the next morning, Abimelech summoned all his officials, and when he told them all that had happened, they were very much afraid. Then Abimelech called Abraham in and said, well, what have you done to us? How have I wronged you that you have brought such a great guilt upon me and my kingdom? You have done things to me that should never be done. And Abimelech asked Abraham, what was your reason for doing this? Abraham replied, I said to myself, there is surely no fear of God in this place, and they'll kill me because of my wife. Besides, she really is my sister, the daughter of my father, though not of my mother, and she became my wife. And when God had made me wander from my father's household, I said to her, this is how you can show your love to me. Everywhere we go, say of me, he is my brother. Now, Abimelech's very upset. I think I would be too. I mean, you just put yourself in his shoes. He summons Abraham, and he has 3 basic questions. We just read them. The first question is what have you done to us? Well, yeah. He wants Abraham to admit what he's done. And then question number 2, what have I done to you for you to do this to me? Literally, this reads, how did I sin against you that you have brought on me and on my kingdom a great sin? That's the literal. And great sin, by the way, was a euphemism for adultery during this time period. So now we realize, he recognizes, why would you put us in this predicament that I would be an adulterer with your wife? It's a good question. And then question number 3, what was your reason for doing this? We always want to know why, don't we? And he wants Abraham to answer that why question. Why are you doing this? Why did you do this after all? Now, Abimelech has 3 questions, basically. Abraham has 3 excuses, of which we already have said our excuses are never good enough, right, for repeat offense. But here they are. Abraham's 3 excuses are excuse 1. I thought to myself, I love that. I thought to myself that there was no fear of God in this place. In other words, you'd take my wife, you'd kill me, you'd take my wife. You guys have no morality whatsoever. Okay, that's excuse number 1. Is that an excuse before God? Is that a good excuse? I think all these people are immoral, so I'm going to lie. I mean, let's think about that, you know. But no, excuse number 2. Besides, she is my sister. Kind of. She's my half-sister. In fact, she was my sister before she was my wife. I mean, that's literally what it says. She's my sister before, now she's my wife. So sister, you know, yeah, we were sisters longer than husband and wife. Do you think that logic works with God? Excuse 3, this has been my mode of operation all along. Now, it doesn't say that, but that's exactly what it means. This was the plan, man. And notice who gets blamed. When God called me to wander, this is what we decided. It sounds like it's God's fault, right? It makes a lot of sense from a human standpoint. You know, we're going to wander. We're going to be going into areas where people, you know, they're strangers, they're foreigners. We're the odd ones out. They're going to take advantage of us. We've got to protect ourselves. We're, you know, who are we? And so understand why this would make sense. You know, now we're wandering. We're not at home base with all the family clans and all that. We're out here on our own. And so when God called us to wander, we decided this is what we'd do, that she'd say, I'm her brother, and I'd say, she's my sister. In others, we came up with this. This was their mode of operation. And so we see why repeat offenders. This was the plan. This was the plan. I think deep down in the heart of many believers, that's the plan. They're going to give it a little token resistance, but they know full and well they'll give in because they're still fearful. They feel like they're being withheld from something, whether it be pleasure. They're not being protected. They're not being provided for. Whatever that might be, it's like, but they know deep down in their heart, and you know deep down in your heart whether you're really resisting or not, or if you're just going to do the same old thing, because this deep down is the dark plan of your heart. It's like, when you say, God, just forgive me. The first time we hear of them lying about the relationship in chapter 12, you know, it's like, they go to Egypt, they lie about it. It causes someone harm because they lie about it, namely Pharaoh. And then Pharaoh tells them to leave and he gives them a bunch of gifts. That's weird. Doesn't that make you feel weird? And now in chapter 20, it happens all over again, kind of like washing your hair. If you look on, nobody reads the labels anymore. You know, wash and repeat. Wash and repeat. Now we can see why it continues to happen. This has been the plan all along, just like earlier when Sarah and Abraham were caught in a lurch. This was the plan to lie about it, you know, and they do the same old thing, and they do it here again. Kind of like the promotional phrase, you know, from the old TV show Batman. You know, when it was going off, they would remind you to watch it again, and they would say, same bat time, same bat channel. Now, some of you are too young to know that, but I remember that as a kid. Same bat time, same bat channel. In other words, come back here tomorrow or whatever the day is, the same time and the same channel, and you'll see another episode. I think it's the same. Do you ever find yourself same bat time, same bat channel, same sin? There are certain situations that reoccur in your life. They cycle back around again, and you end up recycling your past behavior, the same sinful response as before. Same bat sin, same bat response. So it was with Sarah and Abraham. You'd think that maybe they would trust God by this time. Having walked with God another 20 or 30 years, we see them no different. Talk about grace. Talk about grace. Why do we do this? This great man of faith hasn't seen anything but God's faithfulness again. The exact same scenario. Still chooses not to trust God. You and I have what I call ruts in our lives, much like a country dirt road. You know what I mean. It's almost to the point, these ruts are so deep that we can take our hands off the steering wheel and that pickup will take the curve on its own. Same. You see, we have certain sins in our lives and we respond the same. And each time we respond in kind, the same, the ruts get deeper. And it's almost like we mindlessly do the same thing over and over again. God is waiting to see if you will choose Him. It's an opportunity for you to prove your faith and your trust in Him because He's been nothing but good to you. But even when you don't, it points to God's grace. God's grace, yeah. You see, God already knew that Abraham would fail His grace. The grace He had shown before and all the other occurrences, He knew that He would fail him again, but God still shows grace. And the same is with you. He knew that you would not pass the test. He knew that you would fail His grace. He knew all of that, but He still shows you grace. Last point. God's grace transforms people. See, God's grace is not a license for us to sin. I think some people feel that way. Paul argues against that. Some are saying, hey, let's just keep on sinning so that grace can increase. Just more grace. I sin more, I need more grace, and it's there. The wonderful grace of God. See, in fact, God's grace is not about that. God's grace is about teaching us not to sin. Scripture tells us that the grace of God trains us to reject ungodliness and selfish desires and to live self-controlled, upright, and godly lives. The grace of God is changing us, transforming us, training us to be different. That's what the grace of God received does. And after multiple times of doing the same thing, the same bad time, the same bad channel, the same bad sin, when are you going to trust Him? When are you going to trust Him to provide and to protect? And so we continue with verse 14 here in the text. Then Abimelech brought sheep and cattle and male and female slaves and gave them to Abraham. And he returned Sarah his wife to him. And Abimelech said, my land is before you. Live wherever you like. To Sarah he said, I'm giving your brother, I love that, I love it, 1,000 shekels of silver. This is to cover the offense against you before all who are with you. You are completely vindicated. Then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech, his wife, and his female slaves so that he could have children again. So the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife, Sarah. So simply amazing. First you talk about unmerited favor for Abraham. It's just amazing. Now we have, not only is God gracious, but now Abimelech is gracious. He gives Abraham back all kinds of wealth, bestows wealth on him. Second, he returns Sarah his wife. Third, he offers residence in the land, unlike the Pharaoh who said, get out of here. He offers residence in the land. And then fourth, he restores Sarah's honor by paying Abraham 1,000 shekels of silver. Now, how much is that? Well, a half shekel of silver during this time paid a laborer for a month. So that's over 167 years for a general laborer to work. That's how much he was given. Now, and you think about that, that's a lot. Now, notice that nothing but good happens to Abraham. That's grace. Abraham gets everything he doesn't deserve. Like the first time, he got everything he didn't deserve. He doesn't get punished. It isn't just that he doesn't get punished. He gets blessed. That'd be like when your kid does something wrong, you decide to show them grace and not punish them, but now you decide to take them out to their favorite restaurant and eat and go to an amusement park. That's what this is. That's called grace. And I know a lot of parents don't like this, but this is called grace. And that's what God does for us. He does this for Abraham. Abraham doesn't deserve any of this. In fact, he deserves just the opposite. Instead of being punished, God blesses him. And if this bothers you, then grace is troubling. See, the times in my life that I've benefited the most from my parents weren't the times that they punished me and gave me what I deserved, but it's the times that they withheld their punishment and they blessed me instead. not just withholding of punishment. So understand, you say, well, wait, I don't like that idea. I don't like that. No. Understand that punishment and stuff, all that stuff that we deserve, that just is there to highlight how beautiful grace is. See, there's too many people today that don't understand grace. They think they deserve everything. I'm tired of the phrase on television, you deserve that. You know, people talk about, you deserve that. And as if they don't understand, they think that they're entitled to blessing and favor and all this in life. Somehow they're entitled to be blessed. They don't understand grace because, you know what, if you got what you deserve, if you really got what you deserve, it wouldn't be favor and blessing. And and then they have a group of fools that go around there and encourage that kind of stuff. Yeah, you do deserve that. It's like crazy. Dude, you don't understand. You don't deserve any of that. And see, understand, they'll never understand what grace is whenever they think that they're entitled. See, because grace is all about favor. Getting what you don't deserve. Because if we got what we deserved, it would be judgment. Because he just sinned once. It's not good enough. But we sin over and over and over again. And what should God do? We know what he should do, but he took our place in Jesus and now shows us grace. Does this make sense? It's important for us to understand that grace shines brightly against the backdrop of what you and I deserve. And so if you're always running around and giving people everything they want, and all the time, and there's always blessing and favor and so forth, they're not going to get a good picture of grace. But likewise, if you're always giving people what they deserve and being hard about it, and never pulling back and go, grace. See, they're not seeing the grace of God. And that backdrop of what they deserve is only there for them to see grace brightly. Does this make sense? And so be careful. Be careful in how you deal with people. Parents and the rest of us, be careful. Be careful. God's grace shines brightly against the backdrop of what you and I deserve. See, we see it then transforming. And when we see you know what? I deserve this, but my parents gave me this. God, I deserve this, but you gave me this. It's so humbling. It's so humbling. When you really realize what you deserve, and then God does just the opposite and just pours out his grace upon your life, you're humbled. It's transformative. And it transforms Abraham. Listen again to verses 17 and 18. It says, then Abraham prayed to God, and God healed Abimelech and his wife and his female slaves so that they could have children again. For the Lord had kept all the women in Abimelech's household from conceiving because of Abraham's wife Sarah. God's word to Abimelech has been, you know what, you're as good as dead, dude, and all who belong to you are going to die. But we now get a clear picture of how that was going to happen. See, God kept all the women here in this verse in the household from conceiving. That's what's going on. Abimelech was as good as dead because his entire household would cease to exist eventually because they wouldn't have any offspring. Think about that for a moment. So this is not something that just transpired all in 2 days. How would they know that they can't conceive? How would they realize they're infertile and that they're barren? How would they realize all that unless there was some time there? But there came a point in time, they realized that, hey, we can't have any offspring. So there's some time that elapses in this story, and we're seeing that it was God that did that. Most probably by striking them with diseases that rendered them infertile. And so that's why they needed to be healed. But you understand that this is going on. Now keep in mind that at this point in time, now Abraham finds himself. Remember, I love Abimelech in this story because he's actually a pretty good hero. He has God in a dream telling him that you're as good as dead. But if you give Sarah back, then I'll heal you and your household and you'll be able to have kids. He believed it. I actually think that some people, if God showed up in their dream, they would oh, it's a dream. It's a dream. But he believed it, and he responds in faith. And this is God's grace. God's grace is you're good as dead. But I'll restore you, your life and your health, if you listen to my word. Are we hearing this? If you listen to what I'm saying and do what I'm telling you to do, then I'll restore your life. That's grace. Giving him a way out. He takes the way out, calls Abraham. Remember, he said, Abraham, he's a prophet. Seems weird to say. Give his wife back, he's a prophet. And so whatever he says, he's a prophet. He's going to talk to God. And so he's going to pray for you. He's going to talk to me on your behalf. And Abraham does that. And you know what? He's healed. Just think about that for a moment. Abraham. So we see Abimelech's transformed by the grace of God, but we see Abraham being transformed by the grace of God because now he's at a point where, obviously before he wasn't, he's praying for something to happen in their lives that he has yet to achieve. Transformative. One of the best things you can do is if there's something you're longing for, maybe having a kid and you can't, struggling there, best thing for you to do is to pray for those that can't. This is exactly what God has Abraham doing. Dude, you need to pray. You need to pray that they can have children, even though you haven't had a child yet, even though I've been promising you yet. You need to pray for them to have a child. And so he does. And I think this is really a huge lesson because chapter 21 comes after chapter 20, surprise. And in chapter 21, Isaac's born. Only after Abraham prayed for others who couldn't have a kid. Ever think about that? Maybe it's as simple as this. I think Abraham he was transformed. He understood. Maybe all along he should have just been simply praying for the promise to happen. Because later on, when Isaac and his wife Rebekah can't have a kid, one short sentence, and Isaac prayed, and Rebekah conceived. Is it that simple? That Abraham all along should have just been, maybe 20, 30 years went by needlessly? I don't know, but I do know that he had a son after he prayed for others who were in his position. Friends, that's transformative. Grace transforms us. It's impossible to walk away from truly experiencing grace and not be humbled. It's impossible to walk away from truly experiencing grace and be proud. It's impossible to comprehend grace and not be drawn to the person that extends it. It's impossible. Too many people fail to comprehend, and that's the only thing that can justify why so many of God's people who are called by His name don't understand grace is they haven't truly received it. Because it's transformative. It's either God's grace is too impotent to change someone like you, or you haven't really comprehended it. You haven't received it. And I think that if there's any weakness in this scenario, the weakness is not with God, the weakness is with you and with me. That I don't fully understand God's grace, because if I do, it transforms me. It teaches me to say no to those familiar sins. It teaches me to say no to selfishness. It teaches me to live a disciplined and life before the Lord. It teaches me those things. So if the grace of God teaches me those things and I'm not doing those things, maybe I don't truly experience the grace of God in my life. And so this is where I am. And an invitation for you this morning is for you to open up your heart and to let the grace of God, into you, and that you would actually comprehend and to really know what the grace of God looks like. And that begins by you saying, well, realizing that you deserve so much worse from God. But yet He's provided you a way out. You're as good as dead without my help. Abraham's descendant Jesus is going to help you. He will bless all that call upon His name. He will wipe every sin. He took the place for you on the cross. I've got a way, but you have to listen to my word. Do you respond to my grace and my love in the gospel? Are you going to, or are you just going to go, well, I just soon stay in the rut? Say. And then in the future, when you find yourself in the rut again, that just speaks more powerfully of the grace of God, that even though He knew, because even before you were born, He knew everything about you. Even before you walked the face of the earth, He knew everything about you. He knows you better than you know yourself, and He still decided to extend grace to you. That's powerful, my friends. It's transformative when you realize it. And so this morning at the invitation, I'm going to ask the worship team to come forward. And I want you to think, I've got two challenges for you. But before I get to the challenges, if you have never responded to the grace of God in Jesus Christ, why not today? And we celebrate Jesus each Christmas, and sometimes it's about giving presents. But we can't walk away from the Christmas season without thinking about God's grace demonstrated on the cross through Jesus Christ. So if you've never responded, if you want to talk about it and want more answers, my contact information is in the bulletin. You can call me. You can reach me right after. You can come forward if you want to. But don't hesitate. Now, for the rest of you, here's the challenge. Challenge number one. Two challenges. You take one or the other, or none. Challenge, don't disappoint me. Okay, challenge number one is that you're going to pray for someone. You're going to choose someone to pray for. I'm not going to say a week or 2 weeks. I'm going to let you decide that you will pray for someone, that God would bless them in a tremendous way in their life, that he would pour out his favor. And remember, undeserving. Yeah, that could be this person doesn't deserve any of that. Yeah, they don't. Neither do you. But pray that they would receive a true blessing from God, an overwhelming blessing from God in their life, and that would help them draw closer to God. Yeah? Can you do that? Maybe even stretching it. Pray for them some of the things your heart desires for yourself. Can you do that? That's your challenge. Pray for them, blessing maybe even in ways that you would like to be blessed but haven't been. Second challenge is similar. For those of you that have a good friend or a spouse, when I say good friend, it's a person of the same gender, okay? And young guys, this would be a good thing. Find some old man in the church, and I know there's a lot of old men in this church. Find an old man to partner up with in this prayer challenge, and here it is. And ladies, from the ladies group, you've got people you can partner up with, and this is the challenge. It's similar. But now what you're going to do is find a partner, and you're going to pray together for a person. Y'all will name that person, and you will pray together for that person, and while you're separate, but you will pray for this person, the same thing, that they would experience the blessing of God in their life in an overwhelming way, and that would get them one step closer to Jesus, okay? And in both of those cases, here's the challenge. You're going to tell that person that you're praying for them. Hey, this prophet Abraham, do all this, and he'll pray for you. Why not tell people that you're praying for them, that God would bless them? They go, oh, don't do that. I don't think that. If somebody comes up to you and says, don't do that, don't pray that God would bless me, tell me about it. That'd be the first time I ever heard that. Just pray. I'm going to pray for you that God overwhelmingly blesses you and you see him clearly and are drawn to him. That's your challenge. Let's all stand and sing.